If you told me a year ago that my quiet, sweet Melissa would be the center of a betrayal so elaborate it could tear our family apart, I'd have laughed in your face. She's not the type. Melissa is modest, soft-spoken, and introverted. She has this way of making people feel comfortable without saying much, like her presence alone is enough to make the world a little gentler. She's never been flashy or overly social, preferring quiet nights at home to parties or outings. We've been married 8 years and have a 6-year-old son, Ethan, who's the light of my life. Melissa has always been a dedicated mother, patient and nurturing in a way that left me in awe. She's the glue that held us together, or so I believed. But something began shifting about 6 months ago. At first, I didn't even realize it. She started smiling more, but not at me. There was a light in her eyes, a new energy in her step. It wasn't a bad thing. If anything, she seemed to blossom, coming out of the quiet shell she'd always lived in. I chalked it up to her new friendship with Claire. Claire had appeared almost out of nowhere, introduced as a woman from Melissa's yoga class. I didn't think much of it. Melissa doesn't make new friends easily, so it felt like a good thing. Claire was the opposite of Melissa in every way. Outspoken, confident, and charismatic. She had this magnetic quality, the kind of person you couldn't help but notice when she walked into a room. At first, I was happy for Melissa. She seemed happier, more alive. They started spending a lot of time together, which seemed natural. Claire was the kind of person who could make anyone feel special. She even started attending Ethan's handball games, cheering louder than any parent on the sidelines. Ethan adored her, and I figured that was part of her charm. But then things started to feel different. Melissa was pulling away from me in ways I couldn't ignore. She was always tired, always too busy for intimacy. I thought it was stress, or maybe something I'd done. But when I brought it up, she'd brush me off with that sweet, almost pitying smile of hers and say, "I'm just not feeling like myself lately." She didn't want to talk, didn't want to touch me. The warmth we'd always had was gone, replaced by excuses and distance. Meanwhile, Claire was everywhere. She wasn't just part of Melissa's life. She was deeply woven into Ethan's too. She'd show up unannounced at his school events, bring him gifts, and sit with us at family dinners like she belonged there. Ethan called her Aunt Claire, and I let it happen because, honestly, it felt harmless. She was good with him, better than I was most days, working long hours and struggling to balance everything. Looking back, there were signs. But when I saw Melissa laughing with Claire, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years, I convinced myself it was normal, healthy even. I wanted to believe we were okay, that she was okay. But deep down, something didn't feel right. I just wasn't ready to admit it. The unraveling began innocently enough. It was a Thursday night, and I came home early from work. I thought it would be nice to surprise Melissa and Ethan with a pizza night. The house was quiet when I stepped inside, save for the sound of Ethan giggling in the living room. Melissa was in the kitchen, her back to me, humming softly as she stirred a pot of something on the stove. For a moment it felt normal, like the life I thought we had. But when I walked into the living room to greet Ethan, I saw something that stopped me cold. On the coffee table, propped up against Ethan's school papers, was a glossy photo of him and Claire at his last handball tournament. They were beaming at the camera, Claire's hand on his shoulder like she was the proud parent. I picked up the photo, my stomach twisting. I hadn't been able to make it to that game. I'd been working late, as usual. But why would Claire have a picture of her and Ethan printed out like this? "What's this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Ethan looked up from his toys. "Aunt Claire gave it to me. She said she's gonna frame it for me, but I can keep it for now." Something about the way he said her name, so comfortable, so casual, made my skin crawl. I nodded, muttering something about how nice that was, and walked back to the kitchen, my thoughts racing. "Claire's really making herself part of the family, huh?" I said, holding up the photo for Melissa to see. She turned, startled, but recovered quickly. "Oh, she's just sweet like that," she said, smiling in that soft, reassuring way she always did. "She's been so good to Ethan. It's like having another aunt around." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe everything was fine. But the unease wouldn't go away. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing more. Texts that she'd angle her phone to hide, laughter spilling from the living room when she thought I wasn't listening, and little moments of distance between us that I couldn't explain. The breaking point came on a Saturday morning. I was cleaning out the laundry room when I found her scarf in the hamper. It smelled faintly of perfume, one I didn't recognize. Melissa didn't wear perfume, at least not anymore. I told myself it was nothing, but the doubt lingered. Then, one night I came home late. Ethan was already asleep, and the house was quiet. Melissa was in bed, but something was different. She was lying on her side, her phone tucked against her chest, the glow of the screen still lighting up her face. "You're up late," I said, trying to sound casual. She jumped, quickly locking the phone and setting it aside. "Just scrolling," she said with a small laugh, as if that explained everything. But I caught a glimpse of the screen before she put it down. It was a message thread, and at the top, a name, Claire. I didn't say anything then. I wasn't ready to confront her. But I couldn't shake the image of that name on her phone. I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman I thought I knew, the woman I'd built my life around, was slipping away from me. And I couldn't ignore the growing suspicion that Claire wasn't just her friend. The more I observed, the more I realized I didn't know Melissa at all. The woman I had married, sweet, modest, introverted, seemed like a distant memory. With Claire, she was someone else entirely. It started with the way she carried herself. She was glowing, her cheeks always flushed, her smile quick and genuine in a way I hadn't seen in years. She dressed differently, too sleeker, bolder. When I asked about it, she'd laugh and say, "Claire says I should experiment more. Isn't it fun?" But it wasn't just her appearance. It was her behavior. She was spending more nights out, always with the excuse of seeing Claire for yoga or just catching up. And when she was home, she seemed distracted, like she was somewhere else entirely. The intimacy between us, which had already been dwindling, disappeared completely. Whenever I tried to initiate something, she'd turn away, offering excuses that felt rehearsed. "I'm just tired," she'd say. Or, "Not tonight, okay? It's been a long day." At first, I accepted it. I told myself she was stressed, that it was a phase. But the longer it went on, the more I started to wonder if the truth was simpler than that. She didn't want me anymore. I began replaying moments in my head, little things I'd overlooked. The way she laughed when Claire made a joke, her eyes lighting up in a way they never did for me. The way she leaned into Claire's touch, lingering just a second too long. The way she seemed to come alive whenever Claire was around. And I couldn't stop thinking about what they were doing when I wasn't there. Could someone like Claire, a woman so confident, so magnetic, really replace me? Was that even possible? It was like a splinter in my mind, growing deeper and more painful with each passing day. The Melissa I knew was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And all I could think about was how much fun she and Claire must have been having while I was at work, busting my ass to provide for a family that no longer felt like mine. It happened 2 days later. I came home earlier than usual, hoping to spend some time with Ethan before his bedtime. The house was quiet, except for the faint sound of cartoons playing in the living room. Ethan was stretched out on the couch, completely absorbed in his show, a juice box clutched in one hand. "Hey, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Where's Mom?" He shrugged without looking away from the screen. "Upstairs. She said she's busy." I nodded, not thinking much of it. Music was playing faintly from the bedroom upstairs, and I figured she was just relaxing. It was a small thing she liked to do: light a candle, play some music, and unwind. Maybe LD bring her a cup of tea and join her for a moment. But as I climbed the stairs, I heard it. Not just the music, but voices. 2 voices. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest as I strained to listen. One of them was unmistakably Melissa's, soft and breathy, tinged with a laughter I hadn't heard in months. The other voice was deeper, smoother, Claire's. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about the tone of their voices, the intimacy of it, sent a chill down my spine. I stepped closer, the music growing louder, and pushed the door open slightly. What I saw inside made my stomach drop. There they were. Melissa was sitting on our bed, and Claire leaned toward her, their closeness speaking more than any words could. In their eyes, there was an intimacy that once belonged to us alone. They froze when they saw me, their expressions a mixture of shock and defiance. "What the hell is this?" I choked out, my voice trembling with disbelief and fury. Melissa scrambled to sit up, yanking at her dress to cover herself. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. But the lie was so blatant, so absurd, that it only made me angrier. "Not what it looks like?" Shot back, my voice rising. "You're in our bed. With her. How the hell do you explain this?" Claire didn't flinch. Instead, she stood, smoothing her blouse like she had nothing to be ashamed of. "Maybe it's time he knew," she said, her voice calm, almost taunting. "Shut up, Claire," Melissa snapped, her face a mixture of panic and guilt. But it was too late. The mask was off. The sweet, modest woman I thought knew was gone, replaced by someone who could lie to my face, who could betray me in the most humiliating way imaginable. "How long?" demanded, glaring at Melissa. "How long has this been going on?" She looked down, her hands twisting in her lap. "A few months," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "A few months," I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "While I was working late, trying to keep this family together, you were screwing her in my bed?" "It's not like that," she said quickly, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not just sex. It's more than that." Her words were like a punch to the gut. She didn't even try to deny it, didn't try to lessen the blow. Claire stepped forward then, her confidence infuriating. "You don't understand," she said. "This isn't about you. This is about us." "Us?" I spat, my fists clenching at my sides. "You mean the two of you sneaking around behind my back? You think I care about your excuses?" Melissa started crying then, but I couldn't find it in me to feel sorry for her. All I could see was the betrayal, the lies, and the years of my life that now felt like a cruel joke. "You need to leave," said, my voice low and trembling with barely contained rage. "Both of you, get the hell out of my house." Claire didn't move. Instead, she looked at Melissa, her expression softening. "We don't have to do this," she said, like she was trying to comfort her. But Melissa hesitated. She looked at me, then back at Claire, torn between the life we'd built and whatever this was. "Go," said again, louder this time. Finally, Claire grabbed her purse, throwing me a look of pity or maybe triumph. Melissa followed, her head down, her tears silent. As they left, the weight of what had just happened crashed down on me. The bed was still unmade, the air thick with the scent of Claire's perfume. I couldn't escape the image of them together, the sounds of their laughter still echoing in my ears. This wasn't just betrayal, it was the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about my wife. And the worst part? A part of me wasn't just angry at her. I was furious at myself for not seeing it sooner. After they left, the silence in the house was suffocating. I didn't go downstairs to check on Ethan right away. I couldn't face him. Not yet. I stayed in the bedroom, staring at the unmade bed, replaying everything I had just witnessed. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, calculated. I couldn't stop picturing Melissa's face. Not the face of the woman I thought I knew, but the one I had just seen. The one flushed with excitement, caught in the throes of something raw and undeniable. She hadn't looked guilty until she saw me. No, before that, she looked happy. I heard Ethan calling me from downstairs, and it was the jolt I needed. Wiping my face, I forced myself to go down. He was still in front of the TV, oblivious to the storm brewing above him. "Hey, champ," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Time for bed." He looked up at me with a sleepy smile, nodding as I scooped him up and carried him to his room. He snuggled into his blankets, clutching the stuffed dinosaur I'd gotten him for his birthday. "Mommy said she'd read me a story," he murmured, half asleep. My chest tightened. "Mommy had to go out," I said. "I'll read to you instead." He didn't question it, and as I sat there with the book in my hands, reading aloud, I realized how small he still was. How innocent. He didn't deserve any of this. When I finally went to bed, the house felt colder. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the same room where I had found them, so I dragged a blanket to the couch. My thoughts spiraled. The way Melissa had looked at Claire, the passion, the intimacy, it wasn't the Melissa I knew. It was like seeing her for the first time, stripped of the quiet modesty I had always loved. How long had she been hiding this side of herself? How long had she been lying to me? I wanted to believe this was all Claire's doing, that she had somehow manipulated Melissa into this. But deep down, I knew better. Melissa had made choices. She had chosen Claire over me, over our family, again and again. The next day, I avoided calling her. I didn't want to hear her excuses, her justifications. Instead, I spent the day with Ethan, taking him to the park and trying to act normal. But as he ran around the playground, his laughter ringing out, all I could think about was how Claire had inserted herself into his life, making herself indispensable. That night, Melissa came home. I heard her key in the lock and tensed, bracing myself. She walked in quietly, setting her bag down on the counter. Her face was pale, her eyes red like she'd been crying. "We need to talk," she said softly. I didn't respond right away. Finally, I gestured toward the table and we both sat. "I'm sorry," she began, her voice trembling. "I know I hurt you and Don't," I interrupted, my voice colder than I intended. "Don't sit here and try to make this about feelings. You cheated, Melissa. You lied. And not just to me, to Ethan, to this entire family." Her eyes welled with tears, but I didn't stop. "I saw you," I continued. "I saw how much fun you were having. You didn't look like someone who was conflicted. You looked happy, carefree." She flinched, her tears spilling over. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. It just did." "Bullshit," I snapped. "You didn't fall into this, Melissa. You made a choice. You let her into our lives, into our home, into our bed. And you're telling me it wasn't deliberate?" She shook her head, sobbing openly now. But her tears didn't move me. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she said again. "Stop saying that," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "You knew exactly what you were doing, and you didn't care. You didn't stop to think about me or Ethan. You only cared about yourself." Her sobs quieted, and for the first time, I saw something shift in her expression. She wasn't just crying. She was angry. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking with frustration. "You don't know what it's like to feel invisible, unseen. You're always working, always tired, always somewhere else. Claire made me feel alive. She made me feel like a woman again." Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but part of me knew there was some truth in what she said. I had buried myself in work, thinking it was enough to provide for them. I thought we were okay because we weren't fighting, but none of that excused what she had done. "Do you love her?" I asked finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Melissa hesitated. Then slowly she nodded. I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You need to leave," I said, my voice cold and final. "I don't care where you go, but you're not staying here. And you're not taking Ethan with you." For a moment, she looked like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she stood, grabbed her bag, and walked to the door. As it closed behind her, the house felt impossibly quiet. I sat back down at the table, staring at the empty seat across from me, and tried to process what had just happened. Melissa wasn't the woman I thought she was. She wasn't the sweet, innocent partner I had built my life around. And now I had to figure out how to move forward without her. The house was quieter without Melissa, but it wasn't peaceful. It was a suffocating silence, the kind that made every small sound, Ethan's laughter, the hum of the fridge, feel like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. I spent the next few days alternating between rage and confusion. Ethan, thankfully, seemed blissfully unaware of the chaos around him. I kept things as normal as possible, taking him to school, making his favorite dinners, and reading him stories at night. But inside, I was spiraling. One night, while trying to clear my head, I decided to sort through some old paperwork. It was mostly useless. Tax documents, old receipts, but then I found a folder I hadn't looked at in years. It was from the fertility clinic we'd used when trying to conceive Ethan. Melissa and I had struggled for years, and when nothing worked, we turned to a donor. It was a hard decision, but we had both agreed never to dwell on it. Ethan was ours, no matter what. I opened the folder, skimming through the pages. Most of it was routine medical jargon, but then I saw it, the donor's profile. It didn't have a name, just a set of initials, CM, and a brief description. Healthy, athletic, artistic background. My stomach dropped. CM. Claire's full name was Claire Morgan. I sat there, staring at the initials, my mind racing. Couldn't be a coincidence. The dates matched. The profile matched. Ethan's donor was Claire. It all started to make sense. Her obsessive interest in Ethan, her constant presence at his games, the way she looked at him like he was her whole world. She wasn't just some stranger who had fallen into our lives. She was his biological mother. I didn't sleep that night. My mind was consumed by questions. Did Claire know from the beginning? Was her relationship with Melissa just a way to get closer to Ethan? And what would Melissa say if she found out? The next day, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself. I needed answers. 2 days later, I got my chance. Melissa called, asking if she could stop by to see Ethan. I agreed, but when she arrived, Claire was with her. The sight of them together made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. We sat in the living room, Ethan playing quietly on the rug nearby. I waited until he was distracted before speaking. "I need to talk to both of you," I said, my voice steady. Melissa frowned, glancing nervously at Claire. "What about?" I took a deep breath, then dropped the bomb. "Claire, you're Ethan's biological mother, aren't you?" The room went silent. Melissa's eyes widened, darting between me and Claire. Claire for once looked caught off guard. "Where did you hear that?" Claire said, her voice low and cautious. I held up the donor file. "Your initials, the dates, the profile. It's all here." Melissa turned to Claire, her face pale. "Is this true?" she whispered. Claire hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'm his biological mother." The air in the room grew thick, the tension unbearable. Melissa looked like she was about to cry. "You knew? This whole time?" "I found out after we met," Claire said quickly, her voice defensive. "I didn't plan this, Melissa. I couldn't stay away once I knew." Melissa covered her mouth with her hands, shaking her head. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was afraid you'd push me away," Claire said. "I didn't want to lose you, or him." I stood, unable to sit through their excuses any longer. "So this was your plan all along?" I asked, glaring at Claire. "You seduce my wife, worm your way into our family, and what? Take my son away from me?" Claire's jaw tightened. "He's my son too." "No," I said firmly. "He's not. You might share DNA, but I'm the one who raised him. I'm the one who's been there for him every day of his life." Melissa finally spoke, her voice shaking. "We never wanted to hurt you." I turned to her, my anger flaring. "Don't you dare play the victim here, Melissa. You were gonna run away with her, weren't you? Take Ethan and leave me behind." She didn't answer, but her silence was enough. I turned to Claire. "And where were you planning to go? That house you've been saving for with your dirty money?" Claire's face darkened. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" I shot back. "You think I don't know about the money laundering? The fake accounts? I've been putting the pieces together, Claire. And I'm not going to let you get away with it." Melissa looked at me, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you talking about?" "Ask her," I said, pointing at Claire. "Ask her where the money for your little fantasy life is coming from." Claire stood abruptly, her composure cracking. "This conversation is over." She grabbed her bag and stormed out, leaving Melissa sitting there, stunned and silent. I turned to her, my voice softer now. "Melissa," She's not who you think she is. She's using you, manipulating you, and she's putting Ethan in danger. She didn't respond, just stared at the floor, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, I saw her not as the villain, but as a victim. Claire had spun her web so tightly that Melissa couldn't see the truth, and I hated myself for the small part of me that still wanted to protect her. After the confrontation, I knew Claire wouldn't back down easily. She was too cunning, too invested in her twisted idea of family. If I wanted to protect Ethan, I had to move quickly and carefully. The first step was gathering evidence. I contacted a private investigator, the same one I'd used before, and handed over every scrap of information I had on Claire, her shady finances, her connection to Ethan's donor file, and her suspicious involvement in our lives. Within days, the investigator uncovered exactly what I feared. Claire had been laundering money for months, funneling it through shell accounts to purchase a house in a neighboring city. The deed was in her name, but the documents listed Melissa as a secondary resident. It was clear they had been planning to take Ethan and start over. But the most damning evidence came from an intercepted email. Claire had written to a contact, someone clearly involved in her criminal activities, about the urgency of finalizing the house purchase. The email read, "I need this done ASAP. We're leaving at the end of the month. The kid is coming with us, and I don't want any loose ends." The kid, my son. I stared at the email, my hands trembling with rage. Claire wasn't just a liar. She was a threat. The next time Melissa showed up to see Ethan, I confronted her with the evidence. "You were going to leave," I said, holding up the printed email. "Take Ethan and run off with her. Don't bother denying it." Melissa's face crumpled as she read the email, her hands shaking. "I didn't know about this," she whispered, her voice hollow. "Didn't you?" I shot back. "You knew about the house. You knew she was saving for it. Did you really think all of that money was clean? Or did you just not care?" She collapsed into a chair, tears spilling down her face. "I didn't know it was this bad," she sobbed. "I thought we'd just start over. I didn't think she'd do something like this." I wanted to yell, to remind her that she was complicit, but I held back. For all her faults, Melissa wasn't Claire. She'd been swept up in something she didn't fully understand, and now she was paying the price. "Listen to me," I said, my voice firm. "This isn't just about you anymore. Claire is dangerous, and she's not stopping until she gets what she wants. If you want to protect Ethan, you have to help me stop her." She nodded slowly, her tears subsiding. "What do you need me to do?" With Melissa's reluctant cooperation, I handed over everything to the authorities. The investigator's report, the financial records, the email. It was enough to open a case against Claire. The arrest happened a week later. Claire was taken into custody at her apartment, her face a mask of fury as the officers escorted her out. She didn't go quietly, of course. She shouted threats, claiming she would fight this and take what's hers. But the evidence was overwhelming. The money laundering charges alone were enough to keep her behind bars, and her plans to abduct Ethan only sealed her fate. For a moment, I thought it was over. Claire was out of our lives, and I could finally focus on rebuilding my family. But life, as I was quickly learning, doesn't tie itself up neatly. The days after Claire's arrest were strangely quiet. It was as though her absence had lifted a weight from the house, but in its place was an uncomfortable emptiness. Ethan asked about her a few times, where she'd gone, when she'd come back, but I kept my answers vague. He didn't need to know the full truth, not yet. Melissa, on the other hand, was visibly haunted. She moved through the house like a shadow, her usually soft and serene presence replaced by something heavy and broken. I could see the guilt eating at her, though she tried her best to hide it. One evening, after Ethan had gone to bed, she finally spoke. "I want to fix this," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I want to fix us." I didn't answer immediately. Her words hung in the air, fragile and uncertain. I had no idea if we could ever truly rebuild what had been broken, but I knew I had to try, for Ethan's sake if nothing else. "We can try," I said finally, my tone cautious, "but it's going to take work. From both of us." Melissa nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. I'll do whatever it takes. The three of us went to the park the next weekend. It was something we used to do all the time when Ethan was younger, but it felt different now, like we were trying to recapture something we'd lost. Ethan ran ahead, chasing after ducks and laughing as they scattered. Melissa and I walked side by side, the silence between us awkward but not entirely uncomfortable. I'm sorry, she said suddenly, her voice so soft I almost missed it. For everything. For lying. For hurting you. For all of it. I stopped walking, turning to face her. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. I was so selfish, she continued. I got caught up in something that felt exciting, and I didn't think about what I was throwing away. I didn't think about you. Or Ethan. For the first time, I saw just how much she regretted what she'd done. It wasn't an excuse, but it was something. I need you to prove it, I said finally. Not just with words. You need to show me that you're willing to put in the effort. I will, she said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. We started small, talking more, spending time together as a family, and addressing the parts of our relationship that had been broken long before Claire entered the picture. One night, as we lay in bed, Melissa brought up something that caught me off guard. I think we need to work on our intimacy, she said, her cheeks flushing slightly. I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her bluntness. What do you mean? I don't know, she admitted, fidgeting with the hem of the blanket. I feel like I lost touch with that side of myself. With you. And maybe if we try new things, it'll help. I could tell she was nervous, but I appreciated her honesty. We can try, I said. What are you thinking? She hesitated, then gave me a shy smile. Maybe something adventurous? Something that makes me feel, I don't know, more alive. It wasn't easy, but we started experimenting. Slowly, carefully. It wasn't just about sex. It was about rebuilding trust, rediscovering each other in a way that felt new and exciting. For a while, it worked. Weeks passed, and things began to feel almost normal. Melissa was more present, more attentive. We laughed together, talked late into the night, and shared moments that reminded me of why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. But there were still moments when I saw the sadness in her eyes, the guilt that lingered no matter how hard she tried to hide it. I wanted to believe that we were moving forward, that we were leaving the past behind. Until the day I found the letter. It was tucked into her purse, half hidden beneath her wallet. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for the spare key to Ethan's bike lock. But when I saw Claire's name scrawled across the envelope, I couldn't stop myself. Inside was a letter, written in Melissa's familiar handwriting. Claire, I don't know where to begin. I miss you. I think about you every day. I know what we did was wrong, but I can't stop loving you. I don't know if I ever will. The rest of the letter blurred as anger and betrayal surged through me. My hands trembled as I shoved it back into her purse, my heart pounding. That night I confronted her. You're still writing to her? I demanded, throwing the purse onto the table. Melissa froze, her face draining of color. It's not what you think. Don't, I snapped, cutting her off. Don't lie to me again. She looked away, tears brimming in her eyes. I've been visiting her, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. In prison? You've been visiting her in prison. She's alone, she said defensively. She doesn't have anyone else. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything Claire had done, after everything we had been through, Melissa was still choosing her. You still love her, I said, my voice hollow. She didn't answer, but the look on her face was all the confirmation I needed. The next day, I filed for divorce. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep fighting for someone who wasn't willing to let go of the past. Melissa tried to talk me out of it, begging me to reconsider, but her words felt empty. You can't have both of us, I told her. You need to make a choice. But the truth was she already had. In the weeks that followed, I focused on Ethan, trying to shield him from the fallout as much as possible. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was the right decision. As for Melissa, I don't know if she ever stopped loving Claire. Maybe she didn't want to, but for me, the chapter was closed. And I knew I had done everything I could to protect my son and myself from the wreckage they left behind.